There are two ways you can softmod your PlayStation 3 console: custom firmware and HEN. This video will be a brief overview between the two, modernised for 2024. The model of your PlayStation 3 will determine which softmod it can support. Custom firmware is supported by all fat models, slim 2000 and 2100 models, and some slim 2500 models. The slim 2500 models may be supported if the date code is 0D or less, or if it is manufactured on or before December 2010. Any later slim and all super slims do not support custom firmware. HEN, also known as PS3HEN, on the other hand, is supported by all PS3 models, fat, slim, and super slim. Custom firmware is modified unofficial firmware. The softmod is active as soon as the console is powered on. It grants complete control of the console, level 0 bootloader, level 1 hypervisor, and level 2 game OS. PS3HEN, on the other hand, is a tether softmod, meaning you have to activate it every time you boot the console on. It grants a partial but significant control of the console, level 2 game OS. As someone who has used both types of softmod over the years, I will give my opinion on the risk of being banned. I have used PSN to go online and play multiplayer, it works just fine. However, I do not cheat in online play or hack trophies or any other form of cheating. Provided you take a common sense approach, that is, not grief or cheat trophies, you should be okay. It's worth noting that when trying to log in PSN on custom firmware, you will be asked to deactivate syscalls and clear the syscall log. This seems to make it like a normal console in Sony's eyes, and from what I can tell, does the trick just fine. In contrast with HEN, you do not need to do anything special to go online. Here are some shared features that both softmods support. Region free. By default, most PS3 games, minus a couple of exceptions, are region free. So that means, for example, if you were to buy a PAL game and you were based in an NTSC region and it was a PlayStation 3 game, it would play just fine. However, if you were to play a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 game that were from outside your region, these would not boot. With either PS3HEN or custom firmware, they would boot. Homebrew apps. So both softmods do support the majority of homebrew apps and the most popular ones. So for example, Multiman, Webman mod, Managuns, these work just fine on either of the types of softmod. However, it is worth stating that custom firmware does seem to be a lot more stable overall when running these apps. Fan speeds. So with some homebrew apps such as Webman mod, you can actually change the default fan curve in the console. So this is basically what percentage the fan runs at certain temperatures. By default, Sony used the Syscom one, which was actually very bad in hindsight because it allowed the console to run too hot, and that is mainly why the yellow light of death phenomenon came to be, because the components started degrading at an alarming rate due to the excess temperature. This is also especially important for the older fat models, as these were the main ones that would get defective, especially the launch models that had the 90nm RSX and the 19nm cell. PlayStation 2 emulation. So by default, if you do not have a PlayStation 2 compatible PlayStation 3, so for example if it is not one of the backwards compatible models with the 4 USBs, if you inserted a PlayStation 2 disc, the console would simply not be able to play it. However, with both custom firmware and PS3HEN, you can actually play PS2 games. This is done by creating an ISO file, in the case of custom firmware, in which it will be able to boot. With HEN, the process is more complicated. First you have to encrypt it as a PS2 Classics PKG file, and then install it as a regular PKG file as you would with the package installer. When you are using pure software PlayStation 2 emulation, it is worth noting that it is not as successful as the PlayStation 3s that could play the PlayStation 2 games with the hardware on board. Game backups. I will not go into detail on this, but yes, you can easily play PS3 or PS2 or PS1 game backups with a homebrew app such as Multiman or Webman mod. As mentioned before, custom firmware is permanent, while PS3HEN is temporary. It only takes a few seconds to enable HEN, however there is a slight chance it fails and this will cause the console to reboot, in which you can try again. It usually works second time around with no issue, but some people may find this annoying. Without going into specifics of how the inner workings work of the softmods, level 1 hypervisor is still active with PS3HEN enabled, and this can occasionally cause the console to crash while it checks for unsigned code being active. And in general, custom firmware is much more stable when running homebrew apps, so on average it is more reliable. For PS3HEN to play PS2 games, you must encrypt the PS2 ISO as a PS2 Classics PKG file and install it. This can be quite time consuming to set up, whereas on custom firmware you can simply boot the ISO file and it will be ready to play. It is also worth noting there is a homebrew called PS2 Configs, which will improve compatibility even more with PS2 ISOs. However, this does not work with the PS2 Classics PKGs, and you have to select the in manually while you create the PS2 Classics PKG. The PS3 Model scene has found out in the past couple of years it is possible to overclock the RSX, which can lead to significant performance gain in some titles. As I'm making this video, this is still relatively new to the scene and constantly evolving, so if you are interested in what overclocking can do, check out some other videos that explain it in detail. Like overclocking on a computer, you run the risk of bricking the console if done incorrectly or carelessly. I will not go into the specifics of overclocking a PS3 in this video, but as a rule of thumb, it should only be performed on a slim, ideally with a 40nm RSX, or a backwards compatible fat model with a Frankenstein mod. With custom firmware, you have access to more internals of the PS3, such as the ERK. This can be used to remarry the Blu-ray drive if you need to replace the one in your console after booting in factory service mode. You can also decrypt a PS3 internal drive on a desktop computer with this key. Be aware that this is a lengthy process, however, in case the console ever becomes unusable, and as the hard drives are encrypted specific to each console. You can also perform other actions in custom firmware settings of factory service mode. The ones I mentioned here are what I consider most important. Other OS. Sony famously removed the ability to use the Other OS feature, which eventually led to a class action lawsuit. However, despite this, it was permanently removed from the official firmware. Some custom firmware distributions restore this functionality, which allows another operating system, such as Linux, to run on the PlayStation 3. Overall, I would say custom firmware is definitely worth using if your console supports it. Over the years, PS3HEN has greatly improved and is much more stable than it used to be. I'd imagine most people only care for playing game backups or region free, so may not be concerned of the extra functionality custom firmware brings, except maybe overclocking. Of course, if you are using a later Slim or a Super Slim, you have no choice but to use PS3HEN. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Feel free to leave any comments about any other information you think is worth mentioning in 2024.